Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. One of the things I love best about doing a podcast is how much I learn when I research and prepare for an episode. So as a health educator, a 61-year-old woman, a mother of 4 children, someone who's had a long and healthy or unhealthy sex life, you would think I would not have much more to learn about menstruation. So here in episode 179 of 1,000 Tiny Steps, I'm going to share with you some of the things I've learned about periods. And some of them I knew. A lot of the nuts and bolts of the period I know. Why we bleed, when we bleed, how come we bleed, where the blood comes from, what the blood's made of. All of that I understand. I did not know until I researched and did the episode on the pill how much the hormonal process of menstruation of a female cycle matters. And in researching for my next couple of episodes on the period, I really came to realize why there's such a stigma about it, how ignorant the male half of the population is about it, and how willing society is in general, men and women, to use periods and the hormone fluctuations that women have and their cycle as reasons to keep them from doing things that are traditionally male, or to justify keeping them doing things that are traditionally female. In researching for the period, the first thing I did was Google movies about periods. And so I got this bizarre list of movies that aren't about periods at all. They're just pop culture movies that had scenes in them with periods. So the first one that came up was 16 Candles. This is an 80s classic movie that anyone that was middle school, high school, college in the 80s has seen. Molly Ringwald plays a younger sister. It's her birthday, but her older sister's getting married. Everyone forgets her. And the sister who's getting married is having her period, and she has massive cramps. And so she takes too much pain medication. So she's out of it. She's high as a kite, and she can't function, and she's sloppy, and she's passing out, and she's completely wasted for her wedding. And while they're getting ready before they walk down the aisle, the intercom is on in the little anteroom that they're in off the church. And they're all talking about the fact that I'm having my period and my honeymoon's going to be terrible. And the whole congregation hears it. So the message this glaringly sends is that she's somehow off because she's menstruating. She hurts so much that the only way she could get through her wedding was to take pain medicine. And then they had her OD on it to make it funny, like ODing on pain medicine to manage period cramps that were so bad that she didn't think she could go through with her wedding is funny. And let's make fun of it. And let's make a whole conversation around now everyone knows she's having her period. So when she walks down the aisle in her pretty white dress, everyone in that theater is thinking, oh, she's having her period, but not in any sort of meaningful, healthy way. That was the first movie that I saw. The next one was a movie called No Strings Attached, and it was sort of a fun movie about a boy that hung out with this whole group of girls, college-age people, and they were all having their periods at the same time. So he came home and he had like salt and sweets. He made them a playlist with songs like Red, Red Wine and Sunday, Bloody Sunday. And, it was actually a tongue-in-cheek and a bit more easy to take because he was really reaching out and trying to say that he empathized and understood how the girls felt. It was awkward. At least I looked as a 61-year-old. I wasn't offended by it like, oh my God, I'm so uncomfortable. I just felt like a lot of the humor and jokes fell flat. And again, it made the girls look somehow pathetic or damaged. It wasn't empowering. It was funny, but not empowering. My Girl. This was a movie that Macaulay Culkin was in. I don't remember the name of the female actress, but there were 2 kids and she lived in a funeral parlor and they became really good friends and she gets her period. So she's freaking out. She doesn't have a mother. Her dad's a mortician. She runs downstairs thinking she's going to die of a tumor. She's got her period. So he enlists the help of his friend to help her with period products and the period and all this. So she's freaked out and she's angry that she has it. And she doesn't know what to do. And Macaulay Culkin's character comes over to play. Do you want to go swimming? And of course she can't go swimming. She's wearing a pad. How do you go swimming in a pad? And so she's like, don't come back for 5 to 7 days, which is hilarious, right? Periods typically last 5 to 7 days. But again, the focus was on her lack of a mother. No one thought to tell her anything. Why wouldn't a father think to tell his daughter about periods?
This is my issue. If you're married to a woman, you know darn well she has a period. You're intimate with her vagina. That's where the periods occur, uterus, vagina. But in this movie, the father had never said anything to his daughter about it. Didn't think I had to yet. Okay. Then the next movie was super bad. This was horrifying. So it's a party, everyone's drinking. There's a male character, one of the main characters in the movie, is dancing with this girl who's clearly shit-faced, and she's gyrating and grinding on his leg and all this kind of stuff. And you see this whole scene. When he walks over to get a beer with his friends, he's got this big blood stain on his leg. And they're like, oh, what happened? You cut yourself? You got blood in your leg. So they all touch it and they smell it and they look at it and they're like, oh, gross, it's period blood. That's disgusting. And somehow they've come to know, maybe she walks by, but it's the girlfriend of the guy that's hosting the party who's having her period and she's very bloody. She's bled through. They're all grossed out by it. And then a fight ensues and they're insulting each other and calling the girl disgusting and gross and period blood's vile and they're dry heaving. And so the girl is this drunk, not at all respectable represented character who's having her period and she bled through and didn't know it. And rather than the guys going to find her to help her out, maybe suggest, look, you're bleeding through. No, it becomes a big joke. And then the boyfriend wants to beat up the guy that was dancing with her because no one dances with his girlfriend. And I didn't even watch the whole thing. Maybe 30 years ago, I would have thought it was more funny because I would have been more in that age bracket. But as someone that can step back and look at my whole life as a menstruator and a non-menstruator and a menstruator with help for IVF, I just felt like one more example of making women gross and ew, and that's their business. And then boys just treating it like some inconvenient, disgusting event. Then the Blue Lagoon. So this is not an overly well-known movie. I remember watching it. Brooke Shields was in it. These two little children, a brother and a sister actually, get stranded on a desert island as little kids, like 3 and 5 or 4 and 6. And they live there. They somehow figure out how to eat. And they live there for years and years and they don't get rescued for a long, long time. And so the period part is she gets her period and she's in the water and she's freaking out. And he wants to come help her because she's bleeding and she doesn't know what to do and how to tell him. And it's this whole awkward thing where she just pushes him away and pushes him away. And she somehow rectifies it, but there's never any meaningful conversation around it. You're just sort of left like wondering about it. Then there's a movie called The Legend of Billie Jean, and it was a whole movie about Billie Jean King, and her nickname was the Putter. And she gets her period, and there's a scene where she's in the car and she's in the back seat, and they're talking about, the putter got her period, and she grins because she feels like empowered, like, yeah, I got my period. That one was probably the most healthy of all of these examples, but this is how periods are portrayed in movies. Then there's the movie Carrie. It was Stephen King's first film on a book he wrote. In the opening scene is this girl, Carrie, whose mother is batshit nuts, never told her about a period. She starts her period in the shower after phys ed class. So she's naked and she's bleeding and she freaks out. And so she's going around to the other girls seeking help. And they all laugh at her and they chuck tampons and pads at her and she's horrified. And then when she goes home, her crazy mother locks her in a closet and tells her that she's evil and disgusting now because she's had her period and that means that she's a whore and a slut and all this kind of stuff. For a teenage girl going to that movie who had no background in menstruation, that could be a horrifying, eye-opening experience to learn about having your period. All of these movies sort of got me thinking about how the period is used to sort of substantiate gender roles. Like it's our job to manage it, control it, identify it, take care of it, and make sure it doesn't make anyone else uncomfortable. And it's men's jobs to let women deal with it and to sort of minimize it and make fun of it. So this, of course, gets me asking questions. What did you think about when you had your period? What's a word you use to describe your period? And most of them were negative, painful, period cramps, PCOS, endometriosis, all the negative things that go along with it. Mine was empowering because I was one of the last of my friends to get it. I was so glad I finally got it. And it sort of always reminded me that I could have babies. I have this amazing body that can do this amazing thing. So I started Googling other movies that would give me information on periods worldwide. And the information was mostly alarming. 2 major things came out for me. One was the stigma around periods, and 2 was period poverty. The number of women and girls that live in period poverty, which is both access to products, money for products, information about their periods and products in general, and the ability to get to where the period products are. So it's hard to picture that here in America, but it happens. So I'll start with social stigma. So the lies around periods would be that All girls know they're going to have it before they get it, that parents do a good job of teaching their children about menstruation, that they're empowered to talk about it and not feel ashamed or embarrassed. Now, let's be clear. Nobody wants to pee their pants in public. Nobody wants to shit themselves in public. Middle school age boys don't want to have erections in public. No one wants to bleed through their clothes in public. People don't even really want you to know they have their periods. All of these things are true regardless of the stigma around menstruation itself. One of the biggest problems is lack of information and lack of knowledge. It is alarming in 2025, the number of girls who do not know anything about periods until they have it. 60%. 60% worldwide don't know what a period is until they start it. 50% of girls don't know it has anything to do with having a baby. They don't know. Why is this happening to me? I knew what a period was long before I started mine. All my friends had it. We talked about it. Some great sleepovers when I was in my late elementary and early middle school years. We talked about everything. And there was always 2 or 3 girls that had all the answers. There were a couple of girls in my 6th grade class at Kimball School that carried pocketbooks, and I thought that was the coolest thing, but they didn't always carry them. So I asked a girl once, why do you carry a pocketbook sometimes? And she's like, to put my period products in. And I was just like, you get your period? So, it would be 3 more years before I got mine. That's what they did. Social stigma is a big one. So there's a lot that goes with it, and it persists to this day. So in modern day America, really where you live, what religion you are, how much money you make, where your parents come from and how they were raised plays a huge role in what you know and how you feel about your period. And there's nothing wrong with that. Families have autonomy. If a mother is shy and uncomfortable in dealing and talking with their child about it, that's fine. They figure out a way to converse about it. The mother does the best she can. Schools and public health classes, like I was a health educator, address these things in late elementary and early middle school years, 5th grade, I think. But there are children that start younger than that. And now with all the hormones and stuff we're putting into our food, girls are getting their periods younger and younger. This was actually one of the first uses of puberty blockers. You get girls who are 6 or 7 or 8 years old and they're starting to show signs of puberty. This is when they're known to be very safe. So you take puberty blockers while you're like 7 or 8. Seldom don't take them for more than 2 years or so. And you hold off puberty until your body is at an age where puberty would be a more normal event. Then you go off them. That's the main reason for the invention of puberty blockers. There's research into all other sorts of uses for them now. But the main thing was little girls starting to, get pubic hair and armpit hair in kindergarten or 1st grade. And, those things are precursors to menstruation. Social stigma. We are taught often as girls that we should keep it quiet, that don't ever say I'm having my period. You could say, it's my time of the month. I never had a hard time saying that I was. That's just me. I don't have a hard time saying a lot of things. But that's not true for everybody. There are times, I shared a story last time about being in a gymnastics meet, a leotard. There's no way to hide a pad if you're in gymnastics. So to learn to use a tampon or you don't participate. Girls don't participate once a month for years and years and years in anything that might be interfered with by their period. So I want you to think about that for a minute, all you male listeners that don't have a period. What if something happened to your penis once a month that kept you from playing in a baseball game, going skateboarding, going to school, going to dance class, going to theater practice, going to your job, something happening that was either painful or messy, something that you didn't have medication or products to take care of? Imagine something. And you have to live with that. And so once a month, oh no, I hope I don't get my period on Tuesday because Tuesday is a swimming party and I really want to go swimming. Then you get your period Monday. No swimming party for you. These are realities that girls live with all the time. And we're taught that it's our responsibility to make sure other people don't know and are not uncomfortable. It's amazing to me still the number of girls who, like for example, at track camp, if a girl gets her period at track camp, the counselors always send them to me, which is fine, but the counselors can deal with it. And I'll often say, if you're uncomfortable, find someone, to help them or bring them to me. And I just try to say, oh God, yeah, what a pain, periods. Well, we all get them, blah, blah, blah. I try to make it as nonchalant and as regular as possible, while also acknowledging where they're at with it mentally and emotionally. It's humiliating. Teenage girls want their bodies to be perfect. They want their hair to be perfect. They want to fit in. They don't want to stick out in any sort of physical way. So the last thing girls really want anyone to know, including their friends sometimes, is that they're having their period. Secrecy is a bad thing. There was a marathon runner who was standing on the starting line of a marathon, and she realized, oh no, I'm going to get my period. And it was too late to go all the way back to her car and get a tampon and put it in. No one standing on a starting line is likely to have one, So she was either going to miss the start of the marathon or she was just going to have to run and bleed. And so she decided to run. You pay your money, you train, but you're not going to run because you might bleed. So as she was running, it became evident that she had her period. The blood was showing more and more and more. And she said that people started yelling from the sidelines, "You're having your period. You're bleeding." I'm like, "I know. Thank you." What are you going to do? So she finished the marathon, and she was like in the top 3. So she podiumed. So, there's not a lot of time when you finish running before the awards ceremony. And so she, got a towel, got some water, and she stood up on the podium in her running shorts and her tank top with very visible period blood. And she received incredible criticism for this. Like, that's disgusting and that's classless and all this. And her response was like, "I'm the one that was having my period. I'm the one that can say and make decisions about what I do about it. I didn't want to not run a marathon because I was bleeding. I bleed every month. I'm prepared. I had period products with me. I didn't think to put a tampon in before the marathon started because when you're not having your period and you put them in, sometimes they're incredibly uncomfortable." So she made a good choice for herself and received huge criticism for it. Even I have to admit, when I look at it, my stomach clenches. It's not that I'm disgusted by her period blood. It just reminds me of 50,000 memories of my own, of bleed throughs and stained dresses and clothing and messy, messy sex. It is what it is. And people are very different about it. Another major issue is access to period products. So sometimes, like the woman at the marathon, she had plenty of money. She had period products. She just didn't have them with her at that exact time. So this becomes an issue. I'll be talking a lot more about period products in schools, but there are those who say girls need to learn to be responsible. They should pay for their products. Well, okay, if you can't pay for them, then you don't have them. But the other one is you don't always know when your period's going to come, especially middle school age, especially when your periods aren't regular yet. So you don't know. It's not in the mindset of a girl to carry a tampon or a pad with her everywhere she goes. You don't carry a pocketbook. What are you going to put it in your back pocket? You're sitting in math class, like happened to me, and suddenly blood is pouring out of your vagina. What do? You bleed. The number of girls who have shared these stories with me in the last week since I started putting questions out about periods, it's mind-boggling. These girls were embarrassed and felt very, very judged. So access to product, you get it by surprise. Not having money for period products is huge. That affects homeless people. It affects women in prison. It affects families living in poverty. It's very, very prevalent in countries like India and Kenya, less so now, but incredibly prevalent. And there's a whole bunch of other things that go along with social stigma in those countries that make period products almost impossible for girls to find. So what do you do if you have no money for period products and you live here in the United States? Stay home. You stay home, or maybe you bring a roll of paper towels with you and you go and you just keep putting new paper towels in between every class. Schools offer free menstrual products for the most part, but you have to get up and go to the nurse. You have to ask for them. There are girls that won't. There are girls that would rather miss school and stay home than go to the nurse and ask for a pad. It's just the culture. We have a lot of new Americans in Concord, and they come with so many cultural differences and religious beliefs and societal practices that are nothing like America. And, it's hard to stay on top of those. And then just having them at hand. So oftentimes people could afford them, but you have to walk 5 miles to get them, and they're expensive. And you bring them home and somebody else uses them before your period comes. There are just so many facets to period products. One of the movies I watched, I think it was Pandora's Box, a woman that had been in prison. She was arrested. And so before you get arrested, you get booked, and she was having her period. So by the time she got to the prison, she'd already outlived whatever period product she was using. So the female guard said, "All right, you need to take off your clothes." So she took everything off except her underpants. And it was obvious that she was bleeding. And the woman said, "Underpants." And she said, "I'm having my period. I'm bleeding." Yeah, well, so she had to take off her underpants. So she had to go through a strip search bleeding, and the guard was rude to her about it. Then gave her prison gear and no menstrual products. And the woman said, "Do you have a pad or a tampon, something I can use?" "Nope. You'll have to get it at the commissary." Knowing what I know about prison commissaries based on some pretty long conversations with people that have been in prison, there's a whole political agenda internally in prisons around that. The prisoners that run the commissaries might not like you and might withhold products from you because they can, or they might jack the price up. If you're in prison and you have no family nearby to either bring you period products or put money on your commissary account, then you can't afford them. I believe that there's legislation now that prisons have to provide menstrual products for women. So here's where it gets tricky. Are menstrual products a necessary item? Since men don't need them, men are likely to say, "No, I don't need period products." Okay, well, women are half of the population, and they're the half of the population that grows and delivers the babies. So the men that don't need them wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a menstruating woman. So this particular woman finished her story, shared that eventually she was able to have enough money in her commissary that once she had been there for a bit and set up a routine, she learned how to trade cigarettes for pads, that sort of thing. Think about it though, it's your period. Cigarettes or tampons? That's the question. There's been legislation around mandating that free menstrual products be offered to girls and women in prisons and schools and public places where they should have access. I've mentioned that men don't feel that they're a necessary item. So Band-Aids typically are free. If you cut your finger and you go anywhere, but I have a Band-Aid, you don't have to buy the Band-Aid. You don't have to put 25 cents in to get a Band-Aid out of a machine in a bathroom. When you use a public restroom, you don't have to pay for toilet paper. Now, sometimes you have to pay to use the restroom, which pays to have the restroom there in the first place. So that could be considered paying for toilet paper. But if you had to pay to get into the restroom, then you had to pay again for tampons. That's making women pay for restroom services in a way that men don't. There was a later conversation around this with a woman who said that in prison, you were allotted 10 pads a period. So you had to take your soiled pad and show it to the guard before you were issued a new one. Like you weren't just given 10 pads. Now, I can see that maybe they thought you were going to trade them and all the, contraband and that sort of thing. But how humiliating is it? You have to take your pad off, which means you're going to bleed in your underpants. You have to find the guard, show her the dirty pad so that you can get another one. So now anyone who sees this transaction knows that you're having a period. Those were eye-opening experiences for me. The school ones I know. In New Hampshire, there's legislation that dictates that period products must be free and available to girls in public schools. There's actually a bill in the legislature in New Hampshire right now to get that reversed. I don't get it. Who would even think that's okay? Follow my social media and I'll let you know how that goes. But period products in the bathrooms, the tampon machines are now sort of propped open, or if they can be disengaged so you can pull the lever and get the products out. They don't cost anything. But they're terrible, terrible products. They're not comfortable. The pads are huge. So what happens is the girls that use them only use them as a last resort. So for someone that has no access to quality period products, and that's all they get, because they're poor, they get the crappy food and the crappy tampons. Yes, we offer them, but we have a long way to go in making sure that what we're offering to girls and women is healthy, health promoting, non-embarrassing, and that sort of thing. I've talked about India and Kenya as tough countries for people with periods. Girls aren't taught in neither of these countries, and many countries similar to this. Girls are taught nothing about it. The mothers buy into the culture that period is taboo and silent. They had to figure it out on their own. That's part of what makes you grow into a woman. They don't tell their daughters about it. And the number of women in their 20s right now and 30s that were interviewed in Pandora's Box around their mothers not helping them at all is mind-boggling. Like, why wouldn't you help your child? Now, this generation of women feels much differently about it. And actually, there's a group of women in India that started a company making pads. They got these very rustic machines and they make pads. They sit all day and make these pads by hand and package them. And then they take them out and they sell them door to door. They bring them to stores, but what they want is for people that don't have a lot of money, women and girls that don't have a lot of money, to be able to afford them. So they have to work with shopkeepers to make sure that the prices aren't going to be hijacked. So the shopkeeper makes money. Here's the other issue. Many girls and women don't want anyone to know they're having their periods, so they wouldn't buy them in a store in the first place. UNICEF reported, I said this, that 60% of girls don't know they even know what a period is till they get it. 50% of girls don't know that it's tied to reproduction. Only 15 to 20% of girls, this was in 2016 in India and Kenya, even used menstrual products. What they used was rags or nothing. They just bled and stayed home and washed their clothes. So you sit home and you bleed. Then there are all the social taboos and cultural taboos. For example, in India, women aren't supposed to go in the kitchen when they're having their periods. There are temples that women in general, if you've started your period, you're no longer allowed to go in temples. There has been a big uprising in many areas of India around this, where women feel like God gave them their period. Why can't they go in the temple? The division between men and women is massive. The weight and the responsibility falls upon we vagina folks. That can be really tricky. Both Kenya and India have started period education classes to educate young girls. They go into schools. These are all nonprofit organizations that are funded largely by donations and grants. And they give young girls the basic information and they show them period products. One of the biggest surprises in all of this, giving girls pads and tampons and all this, is that many people have no place to throw these things away. You can't just put it in a bag and a truck takes it away. They manage all of their own garbage and trash. You can't have tampons and pads strewed about in the yard. There's no place to throw these things away. So oftentimes what these girls need are period panties or menstrual cups, things that they can use and then clean and then use again. Along with that comes some cultural taboo. So period pants are a relatively new invention. And I had a good talk with a friend of mine who has 6 daughters, and her middle 2 daughters have only ever used period underwear. You put it on, you can wear it all day. It absorbs period blood. It absorbs it in, so you're not walking around like, smushy and disgusting. It lasts up to 6 hours, maybe 8 hours, depending on how heavy your flow is. How great is that? If they have to change at school, they put it in a baggie. They bring a second pair of underpants with them, and they throw it in the wash, and then they're clean. You wear them again a month later. They're a bit pricey, but when you look at the price of tampons and pads over the lifetime of a woman, it's like $6,000. That's a lot of money. So period underpants are like $30 a pair. That's a lot of money. But if you spend $100 on period underwear, you could spend $100 on tampons in 3 periods. Those 3 period underpants would last you 3 years. So ultimately, it's more money up front, but a lot less money over the lifetime of your period. Politically, women are treated as a special interest group sometimes and not as half the population. And that's why sales tax on tampons is allowed to occur. There are 20 states in our country that tax tampons. But the way that these states justify it is that it's not a necessary item, it's a luxury item. So there was an interview with Barack Obama about this, and he sort of laughed it off and said, well, men are making the laws. It's not a necessity to them. And this is where things have to change, because men have to stop only thinking about their crotches, right? It's not just about them. And keeping half the population, the half of the population that grows the babies, is a pretty important part of the world to take care of. There's legislation in all these states to get it changed. Texas no longer has a tampon tax, but before their tampon tax was revoked, you could buy cowboy boots in Texas and not pay a sales tax, but you paid a sales tax on tampons. So maybe it's only a few cents, right? Or maybe it's $1. So that's a lot if you're poor, but taxes goes to the state budget. So I'm sorry, I don't think the government should make money on my period. I just don't think that's right. I shouldn't be paying money. I shouldn't have to pay a tax because I have a period. So that's been a big issue, but 20 states still have a tax on feminine hygiene products. Religion stigmatizes periods, and way back when I did Lies Told to Women and Girls, I talked about this, how women are called unclean, that you're not supposed to touch your wife or converse with your wife while she's having her period. There was just an article on social media about a mother and her child who died of dehydration in a period hut. They were relegated to go out into a period hut, and they died there of dehydration. She wasn't supposed to be near anybody. These are extreme stories, but they illustrate all the beliefs that permeate culture and beliefs that women are told and taught to buy into. I got a little chuckle, like an internal chuckle, about India, living in India, because you're not allowed to go into the kitchen when you're having your period. Oh my God, I hate to cook. I would have been like, I'm having my period every single day of the month. Except in Indian culture, cooking and preparing food is a huge piece of what makes a woman feel like she's a valuable woman. Again, we listen to what we're told to. Another wonderful thing to come out of India was a man who started a company, and he calls himself Pad Man. And he started a company making pads for women to be sold at cheap prices. So like the women that made them, this is another sort of nonprofit company that creates feminine hygiene products for women. He's a bit of a hero because men typically shun all this, think it's disgusting, put it all upon the women, and leave it up to them. There's a movie about him, so I would recommend watching it if you want to. An interesting solution in Kenya were these Days for Girls kits. And so in these kits are a variety of feminine hygiene products that are disposable, pamphlets and information about periods and what they mean, and then these period panties. But they're made out of fabric that doesn't look like underwear, because in many African countries, you can't hang your underwear out to dry publicly. You have to dry them in a private place, like in your house or whatever. So oftentimes women don't wash their underwear for a long time because you wash it and now it's wet. If you only have 2 pair, you can't wash your underwear. You can't dry it. You can't put it out in the sun to have it dry. It's not supposed to show. So these period panties were made that they come apart at the sides. So when you hang it on the clothesline, it looks like a handkerchief or a scarf. It doesn't look like underpants. So they can wear them, catches the blood. They can wash them. They can hang them out with the other clothes, and it looks like handkerchiefs. Imagine that being the hang up with not being able to go to school because you have your period. So let's think about that for a minute. In America, not being able to go to school right now is of moderate levels of stress for girls. Sometimes you can get online learning. You can get someone to bring your assignments home for you. You can catch up on your work when you get there. In certain cultures like India and Africa, where education is a ticket out for girls and women, and sometimes their only ticket out, if they start to miss a lot of school because they're having their period, every month you miss 3 or 4 days, that's a lot of school. Eventually, teachers are going to assume you don't care. None of them talk about the fact that it's their period. They don't feel any support, and they get no support from their mothers. So you're 14 years old, you want to be a doctor or an airline pilot or a business owner, and you start having a period. You can't go to school and bleed all over everything, so you have no choice but to stay home or to figure out a way to make it work. There was a question about diapers. Why don't they wear diapers? Well, babies sometimes there don't wear diapers. They're just naked. They just pee and poop wherever they are. It gets taken care of like that. So, what do you do? What 14-year-old girl wants to put on a diaper? There was a horrifying story about a girl who was leaving school one day because she started her period at school, and a store owner saw her and saw that she was having her period and called her in and gave her products, told her how to use them and everything. So she did. And like a month later, the same thing happened. And he called her over and gave them to her. And then she started to cry, and she said eventually the time came where he said, you need to return the favor. And he insisted that she have sex with him. What was a nice gesture in the beginning and provided this young girl with relief was really just grooming on the part of this store owner to have sex with this young girl. So when I think of all the issues around my period, I feel pretty lucky that I had the upbringing I did, even with my traumatic starting line story and my algebra story and so many others that I've had. I can't complain. Lots of attitudes in modern culture are unchanged. So for this period episode, in talking about access to products and period poverty and stigma, my question was asking about period products in schools. And I got like 75 responses. Men and women alike. The men were mostly supportive from the outside of the circle. Like, this eases my heart. I have daughters. I'm glad to hear that these products are available. I never really thought about this. I don't remember any girls in middle school having their periods. And then I asked mothers to reach out to their daughters and share with me things they hate the most. So there's a dance school in town that has a dress code. So you have to wear pink tights and a black leotard, right? And most dance schools are tights and leotards, especially in ballet class, where so much of ballet is posture and hip alignment and angle and all this. So what do you do when you're having your period and you wear a pad? You're certainly not going to go to ballet class in a pad. This and many other schools allow the girls, you can wear a pair of booty shorts over your leotard when you're having your period. Well, this is like a big giant sign that says, hey, I'm having my period. Girls don't want to go to dance when they're having their period, because if they wear shorts, everybody will know that they're having their period. So to me, this is a logical time to say booty shorts should be an allowable part of the uniform all the time. And then if there's 5 girls in class, it doesn't mean those 5 girls are having their periods. In 2025, in a dance class where kids feel connected and united to a certain extent, they're together every week, girls don't want the other girls in their class to know they're having their period. I need to drive this home. It's not okay to assume that girls are comfortable with this. We have a lot of work to do to make girls more comfortable. So that was a surprise to me. The other surprise was that girls don't want to go to the nurse to get period products because it takes 45 minutes out of your class. You have to sign in, you have to wait. Now, many nurses' offices will have the products just right there in a basket, and you can just walk in and take it, but you have to get your pass signed, right? There's so many little crowd control issues that affect periods in the school setting that a lot of girls just choose to stay home. Then there are those girls that get super heavy periods. So I was talking with my neighbor today, and she relayed a story to me about her period. So she got her period at a really young age, and they were super heavy, unbelievably horribly heavy. She would throw up, she would be sick. And so if she got her period in school, she would get sick and need to go home. The school nurse said to her mother, you need to toughen her up. She can't just stay home from school once a month for the rest of her life. She can't call in sick to work. And her mother was like, you're a nurse. What am I supposed to, how do I toughen her up? She's puking. Like, what? That evoked a huge memory for me around attitudes around periods. When I would go to the nurse and say, I need to go home, I don't feel good, I have a really bad stomach ache. And the nurse would say, what's wrong? And I would say, I have period cramps. And she would say, oh, take some aspirin and go back to class. So if the same cramps at the same pain level were diarrhea cramps, I'd be allowed to go home. Because Lord knows you don't want to have diarrhea at school, but it's okay to bleed at school. And that wasn't lost on me at all. So my mother and I just had a code word if I needed to come home. Now, there were no cell phones then. I can't text my mother and say, come get me. I have to go to the nurse or the main office or somewhere where somebody can hear me. Because my mother one time just kept asking me, and I didn't want to say I'm having my period. I finally was like, Mom, would you just come get me? We decided that if I said, Mom, can you come get me? And she inadvertently said, why, what's wrong? if I answered, yep, I need you to come get me, then that meant I was having my period. And a couple of times I used it because I didn't want to stand there in front of a full nurse's office that had a lot of boys and say I had my period. I hadn't quite gotten comfortable talking about it yet. So the stigma around periods remains. When I taught health, I've talked a lot about some of the lessons I did in health around consent, how I would make the boys ask the girls questions and the girls ask the boys questions. One of my big things around reproductive health, I would use the driver's ed analogy. When you take driver's ed, you don't learn how to change oil, you don't learn how to change a tire, which is really unfortunate. You learn how to operate the vehicle and not kill yourself. So sex education is completely different. We fill kids' heads with information they're never going to remember, and we don't teach them how to just not get pregnant, like have the conversations. I would do all these scripted activities. And I did a whole sex one around periods. The boy would be like, do you want to have sex tonight? And that's not how they would talk about it. And the girl would say, well, okay, sure. And then the boy would say, what's your birth control situation? Do you know where you are in your cycle? And the girl would say, well, I'm not on the pill, but I don't really know where I am on my cycle. And then the boy would say, okay, well, then I better use a condom. Now, a boy should use a condom anyway, but the point of that conversation was that the boy was taking ownership of the reality of the girl's body. It's not up to the girl all by herself to keep track of that stuff. I mean, it is. It's up to her to keep track, to know where she is in her cycle. Is she in week 1, which is the period, week 2, which is a quiet time between period and ovulation, week 3, which is eggs floating around somewhere, and then week 4, which is the week before your next period. So obviously, period week and week 1 are the least likely times to become pregnant, as well as the few days right before you start your next period. Because likely you've already ovulated and the egg is no longer viable because it's died already. However, people get pregnant all the time not thinking that they're going to. My purpose with this was to make both people take ownership. You're not having sex by yourself. So girls, you need to understand how your body works, and boys, you need to understand how their body works. Because the body that grows the baby is the one that stands to risk the most in a sexual encounter. It was amazing to me as well. Like I would ask the question, raise your hand if you've seen a penis, and everybody raised their hands because penises are right there. Raise your hand if you've seen a vagina. Half the girls didn't raise their hands. And I'd be like, girls, you have vaginas. Have you never seen it? Nope. So a lot of what goes into education for girls is taking away the stigma of taking a dang mirror and looking at your lady parts. Get a mirror, look at your vagina, locate all the parts, look at the picture in your health textbook or online of what it looks like, and take a look at yours. It's super important to know what's going on down there. And that will make putting a tampon in someday easy if you haven't had your period yet. See where the pee comes out. I know this might sound embarrassing and gross, but come on now. There's nothing wrong with knowing where things come out and why. That was a huge piece of my education. And I think sometimes if we create girls and boys that are comfortable talking about their genitals and why they're there and what their function is, male body genitals are there to fertilize eggs. And so the sperm has to be healthy and has to provide half the DNA. And the female body is designed, whether or not you ever do, to grow and feed babies. And so those two realities play a huge necessary role in any physical relationship that involves a male-bodied human and a female-bodied human. This goes into every population of people, all the varieties of identities. When you have a penis and a vagina meeting, all of this matters. And the stigma for everybody needs to be taken away. This is really hard for people sometimes. One of the biggest issues around period poverty that makes women who don't know anything about their periods or don't have access to products is typically these women also don't have access to education. And our periods can be a major indicator in how healthy we are, what's going on with our bodies. I used to always converse with my female runners about their periods. I actually did a whole period naming ceremony. So I started coaching in the early 90s, or 1990 actually. I had my period one day and I'm like, oh, Sybil's here. And one of my runners said, who's Sybil? And I'm like, oh God, it's my period. And this just started in college when we all had different names for our periods. And so I just thought, oh, I'm going to call mine Sybil because my personality would change when I was having my period, which is logical because your hormone levels change. Estrogen and progesterone are low, testosterone is super high. So women can often get bitchy and crabby and angry because testosterone's up here. So guys, we act that way because we have testosterone. Anyway, I would remind the girls that it was an unbelievable indicator of your overall health and that it was important to pay attention to your period when you got your period. Was it heavy? Was it light? As the season went along, did you have longer time between it? Did it stop completely? Did you miss a period? This is all unbelievably viable and vital information. In my conversation with my neighbor today, she's a high school teacher. She was talking about a runner who was really into all this, and she had a male coach. And so she had to do all of this research on her period and her female anatomy and her health as it related to being an athlete. And she was just invested in really understanding her body. And I was sharing with Jen all the things I used to do with my runners. And she's like, oh my God, if she had had you as a coach, this would have been an ongoing conversation with her, which brought me back to when I was coaching in Bow. And I did an activity for my girls around their periods. And it made a couple of the girls uncomfortable, which to me is a red flag. If you're uncomfortable talking about your period, somebody needs to make sure that you have a handle on what's happening with your body, that this is a normal, necessary part of life, and that talking about it is good. And I had the athletic director tell me it was inappropriate for me to talk to girls about their periods, that those conversations should happen at home with their parents. 2019, male athletic director. Yeah, he was uncomfortable with it. But what I did all my years of coaching, I never did start this in Bow, but I did it in all 20 years I coached in Concord, is we would have the period naming ceremony. I would take time to get to know the girls. I would have the girls give me names of tell me your grandmother's and great grandmother's names. I'd get a whole list of names. So I had the girls from previous years, so I didn't want to repeat names. Although sometimes when someone graduated, I would reuse a name. Like we gave the name Monique to sort of the most earthy, outdoorsy hippie girl, because Monique, when you think of Monique, it's French and all the stereotypical French, delicate and all this, right? So Monique never went to the most delicate girl. But mine was Sybil, so there would be Gladys, Vera, Bertha, Doris. It would just be names that were just unique and different. And if a girl wanted to choose their own, they were also allowed to do that. But I would bequeath upon them a period name. Once this got going, and I'd been coaching 9 or 10 years, it was one of the most looked forward to days of the fall because everyone couldn't wait to get their period names. And then when we ordered our cross-country shirts, our long sleeve shirts, the period name went on the back. Or sometimes they would have their period name embroidered on their jackets. So people was like, why does your shirt say Sybil? And I'd be like, oh, my period name. It was also a way for girls to say they were having their period if they didn't want to use the words. Keep in mind, Courtney Cox did a tampon commercial for Tampax in 1986, and that was the first time the word period and the word tampon could be used in a commercial. Otherwise, it was just shown and talked around. A girl riding a horse. You want every day of the month to be a comfortable day. Tampax. Yeah, okay, what does riding a horse have to do with your period, right? They just wanted to take away the reality of the period. That was a blast. To me, what that taught the girls was that their periods were not only an inconvenience, which they are, not only embarrassing, which they can be, not only painful, which often happens, not only inconvenient, which is all the time, but they also were a massive indicator of health and a messenger of all sorts of things that were going on inside your body. Now that I've learned so much about the pill, I'm sort of want to be on a crusade to really advocate for girls and women to be handled better medically, that they aren't just put on a pill to quell a symptom, that let's look at what might be causing the symptom first before we decide to put someone on a pill that interrupts completely your normal body process. When we think of India, we think of Indian women. When we think of Africa, we think of Black women. So both of those cultures exist in the United States. In healthcare, actually Hispanic women and Black women suffer the most in regard to reproductive health care. Indian women do better here than those two populations. A lot of medical research and social constructs and everything are geared toward white women. Not that white women get great medical care, because they don't. But a lot of the issues faced by women of color and women of other nationalities and backgrounds exemplifies what it's like to experience stigma and period poverty. Some of it's cultural, some of it's just acceptance. In a multicultural community, you have 5 or 6 different belief systems, oftentimes clashing with one another. And it makes talking about it sometimes impossible and difficult. In one of the empowerment classes that was held actually in New York City, it was a homeless shelter that was for families. They did a whole period education thing because you have these families with young daughters and these things are happening. And this girl had a t-shirt that said, anything you can do, I can do bleeding, which I love. I want to get one for myself, although I don't bleed anymore, but sometimes I wish I did. So the next sort of group of women that was looked at in this movie, Pandora's Box, was the trans community, trans men. A trans male isn't male physically. A trans man or a trans boy is a female-bodied human. Every single person is different. Every trans man has their own history with their period and their background and what they think about it. They also are very unique in their relationships with their bodies. In this movie, I would never have known, had he not said he was trans, that he was not male. He truly, truly looked and sounded and moved and was built as a male human, or what I think a male human would be. So clearly it had mastectomy, so had no breasts, but talked a lot about how devastating testosterone had been for him, that he took a lot of it in the beginning. He liked some of the side effects, but that it made him feel very menopausal and he didn't want that. So he went off it. Luckily for him, he still had his beard, he still had his deep voice. All of his physical characteristics that made him feel male were intact. He had a period still. Sometimes he bled, sometimes he didn't, but he had a cycle. And because of his status as, having taken cross-sex hormones, he didn't always know when it was going to arrive. So for him, having access to menstrual products in a men's room has never been what he would want. He was very clear that that's the last place he would go to get a tampon or a pad. He makes sure to have them. And if he finds him in a situation where he needs one suddenly, he has his group of people that will help him out. For him, a period is the frustrating reminder that no matter what, he will never be completely male, that he will always have this massive female reality to his body. And he tries very hard to accept that in a positive way because he knows that it indicates a beautiful thing, creating babies, something he wishes he didn't have. When asked about why he didn't have a radical hysterectomy or even just a hysterectomy, he didn't want to have menopause symptoms. And he understood that that's what testosterone did. When you completely cut off any estrogen coming out of your ovaries, your body goes into menopause. And as somebody that's in menopause, yay, no period, but you know what? My hands hurt, my knees hurt, my skin's wrinkly and dry, my muscles are getting smaller and smaller. Lots of negative things happen in menopause to the human body, to the female body. It deteriorates, it ages. So a 25-year-old trans man doesn't want to be in menopause. He was very, very happy to be included in a huge conversation about menstruation and period stigma and to be represented as a group. He isn't one to necessarily say men get periods. He's one to say trans men have periods, and we wish we didn't. And that was his feeling about it. I have a friend who's trans, identifies more as non-binary, but very much wants to have a baby. They're more non-binary, but definitely identifies more masculine, not female at all. Very much want to maintain the ability to have a baby. So now you have seems bizarre, not judgy, just different, where you have somebody who very much looks like a male human being with very female reproductive parts, mastectomy, so no breasts, one day wants to have a baby. So this is a trans man who has a much stronger connection and relationship to the female aspect of their reality, of their body. Doesn't mean they like it, doesn't mean they want to call it female, but understand that for it to work properly, they have to maintain their body as it was intended to be. And then there are trans men that have hysterectomies or manage the menopause symptoms, or maybe don't get them as badly because, that varies person to person. What I really learned from this is that women often talk about the sisterhood. So there's a brotherhood for us of people that are menstruating people, and they are a huge piece of the conversation and should not be left out of the conversation when we are looking at ways to make sure there's access to period products. So let's go back to schools now. Well, we should just put them in the girls' bathrooms. So most girls who identify as boys in high school are, in the beginning phases of their transition and might not have a problem going to the nurse or making sure to bring them to school or even going into a woman's room. But I don't know too many high school boys that would walk into a boys' room full of boys and grab pads or tampons out of a dispenser and use them in the bathroom. It's just something that is very private and personal. But there's a Red Dot project, which I'm doing a whole episode on next week. It's an amazing program in our Concord School District. But basically, it's free period products in lockers all throughout the school. And they have a red dot on there. And in there, anyone who needs it finds themselves, oh, I forgot to bring pads to school. Oh my God, I don't have any money. Oh, I never have money. They're just located throughout the school. And the reason that some of the teachers were like, those should be in the girls' room. Well, no, there are a lot of people that might need access to period products that aren't girls. For example, trans boys, or for example, boyfriends or spouses that need to you're at a basketball game at Concord High and your wife gets a period and doesn't have any products. There's a red dot locker in the locker room. You go get one, right? What I like about the accessibility of the Red Dot project is that the period products are out there. Now, it's interesting to note that some of the people that have the biggest problem with these obvious lockers full of tampons and pads and period panties is that, well, they're right out there. They should be hidden more. Well, why? Well, so the girls aren't uncomfortable. The girls aren't uncomfortable like the teachers were 30 years ago. They're not. And unless we tell them they're supposed to be, they won't be. It's just interesting, the dynamic and the generational opinions. If you're a menstruating human, you have solidarity with one another, regardless of how you dress, what color your skin is, what you call yourself, where you live, what you do for a job, what religion you are. There's a connection there, and menstruating humans need to not be divided in this. We need to help one another. And that was really what I got out of listening to that gentleman talk. He was fantastic. Some of the stories told about menstruating people, especially high school and college age girls, is the attitudes and the things they were taught and told from the adults in their lives. And this is where I feel heartbroken for kids. Health educators often pour the responsibility of periods on girls. They leave the boys out of the conversation. There was an ad on social media about, wouldn't it be nice if pediatricians asked their teenage male patients what were they using for birth control? Like, why do we only talk about girls with that? Why do fathers just shake their kids' hands and give them a condom and say, all right, son, make sure you're careful? Why wouldn't fathers sit down with their sons and explain the beauty of birth and the reality of pregnancy and menstruation with their sons? Because they're married, they're having sex with their wives, they have to know these things. And why they think it's not their job to talk about it is beyond me. This is something that came up again and again and again. There was a girl that told a story about being in marching band, and they were in a formation, and she's wearing white pants and she's bleeding and bleeding. And she's just concerned that by the end of the show, when she marches, it's going to show. So there was some sort of break they had. They didn't have much time. And she said to her band, I need to go to the bathroom. And the band teacher's like, is it an emergency? Are you going to pee yourself? And she said, no, I'm not going to pee myself, but yes, it's an emergency. And she was allowed to go. And they were scored down because she came back to the formation late and had to run in. Now, granted, it's not the judge's fault. She was late. She missed the formation. But this is the impact that menstruation has on female-bodied people. And it doesn't have that impact on male-bodied people. And we live in a society that has a government that's predominantly male. A lot of huge decisions are made by men. Tax rates are set by men. Not all men are evil, please understand. But very seldom do men step out of their male reality and into a female reality and see what it would be like. There was another woman, a woman in the military, and one of her jobs, she wanted to be something to do with a missile. I don't remember the exact job, but one of the responsibilities was you had to spend 24 hours in the missile, like sleeping, and you had to stay in there. You can't come out. So there's provisions for peeing and all this kind of stuff, but she had her period. So if you didn't think about it, if you started in the middle of that 24 hours, you had to bleed all over yourself. She started keeping them there, and she'd go in for her next shift and they'd be gone. And she asked the men about it, and they were like, we don't want tampons in here. That's disgusting. Okay, well, tampons aren't disgusting. There's nothing wrong with, where all the bathroom products are, the pee pouch and the poop sack and the toilet paper. Why can't there be tampons there? So I now am paying attention, right? I pay attention all the time. So if you're in a store and you go into a bathroom, you have to pay for the feminine hygiene products. I go to a lot of CrossFit gyms. So our CrossFit gym has a little basket in the back and it has tampons in it. There are no pads. So if any of our members don't use tampons and they get their period, there's no pads. So I'm going to put pads in there. And I know that once I do that, I'm one of the coaches, so I don't mind doing it, but I think other people will do it as well. In CrossFit Amesbury, they have 2 bathrooms with showers, and both of those bathrooms are fully stocked with 2 or 3 different pad sizes and thicknesses and 2 or 3 different tampon sizes and thicknesses, which is wonderful. People always think, oh my God, thank you, that's so kind. Well, it is so kind, but it should be regular. We should look at that and think, oh, look at this, we're being remembered. We should always be remembered. But this is just a part of society it's a straddle the fence issue. There are 2 sides to it. There are 2 beliefs to it. And then there's personality types, shy people. When I was sharing my race story with Jen, I said, what if I was a super shy, girl? What if I'd been raised that this was taboo? I would have been mortified and humiliated. I probably would have run into the bleachers and cried and cried and cried, and I would have missed my race. The marathon runner, what was she supposed to miss her race because blood might make someone else uncomfortable? These are huge, huge taboos and products that girls go through. There's a lot of big pushes now around period justice. Period rights are human rights, gender justice. We have so many ways that we can look at this issue. And it's always easy to put the onus and the responsibility on the female-bodied human. That it's not anyone else's job but ours to manage this and take care of it. But if we can learn anything from marginalized communities, from people of different skin colors, people that stay home 3 days a month because they can't go to work or school because they have their period, if we can learn anything from the experiences that menstruating people have, it's that it's a global issue. Half the population menstruates. Millions and millions of women are menstruating right now. And we're not really supposed to say anything about it. There was a clip in one of these movies, and a woman was speaking before Parliament in England, and she was late because she had to change her tampon. And she said, "I apologize for being late. I'm having my period, and I had to change my tampon before I came in here." Everyone was sort of chuckled and got really uncomfortable. And then she went on to talk about period poverty and period tax and that sort of thing. There was another one. It was a singer, a performer. And she was asked, what are you wearing? Like, what are you wearing? And so she's like, "I'm wearing Versace and Gucci and Playtex." Having my period. And the woman interviewing her was a guy, was like, "Oh, like, why would you do such a thing?" Well, why not? Then there was a talk show host that started a talk show and said, "Oh my God, I'm having my period right now," and da 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 da. And she was told not to say anything about it. That's not a great way to start a talk show. It's a fabulous way to start a talk show. So as with everything I talk about and everything I do, I love learning new things. I love creating conversation. I love making people uncomfortable, right? Because that's how we grow. And you need to do it in a way that isn't injurious or abusive, but you don't get to be a good runner by sitting on a couch. You don't become able to lift heavy weights by never lifting heavy weights. You have to work hard. You have to hurt. You have to suffer and struggle. Women and girls shouldn't have to suffer and struggle for a normal body function. They should be able to enter society on an equal playing field, even if they're bleeding. And they shouldn't be judged or kept from jobs or things because of their periods. The other thing that we need to learn is that while male-bodied humans, have basically a 24-hour hormonal cycle, each day they wake up, they're tired in the morning, they have their active time, they have their time, they're good at their job, they're awake, they're alert, then they get tired, then they go to sleep. Women have their daily 24-hour cycle, but they have a menstrual cycle. And a woman's weight, the amount of water in her body, the amount of blood in her veins, the amount of inflammation in her loins and in her lower back and in her pelvis varies depending on the week she is in her cycle. Very, very different. Smells are different. Tastes are different. Emotions are different because hormone levels are all over the place, because that's what it takes to grow another live human being in your body. Instead of using these things to hold women back, society as a whole should learn about these things, learn about the details of female reproduction and female health as it relates to female-bodied humans, and take the judgment out of it. And men should say, boy, how can we become as physically amazing as women in our day-to-day lives? Because look at what they do while they're bleeding. Be good to yourself. Watch some of these movies that I've mentioned. Be good to someone else. Donate a box of tampons to a homeless shelter. Write a check to a school district for their Red Dot project if they have one. Research in your community ways that you can help women and girls and menstruating people afford and have access to period products and to feel comfortable about it. Keep your eyes and ears open so that if you see somebody struggling, you can help them. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.